Dark Lord Sauron.
Way before Sauron was this evil-looking guy. Before Mount Doom and the spiky armor. Before he was ragdolling dudes in one swipe. And before the One Ring. He was just a pretty boy in the market for some custom jewelry. Hey, I'm Jay, and this is how I made Sexy Sauron. Alright, hey, so for those that don't know, I'm a Lord of the Rings fan and nerd. There's a show on TV right now called The Rings of Power, and so far, super enjoying it. But in the back of my mind, I was just thinking, please be good, please be good, please be good, please be good. And it's pretty good. Super excited and stoked to be back in Middle Earth. Just letting it happen, just letting it wash over me. With this new excitement and motivation, I kind of wanted to point it towards some Lord of the Rings project and art. And so I dug up something that I've been interested in for a long time from when I originally saw the making of The Lord of the Rings, which I still watch all the time, by the way. In the behind the scenes of the movies, they talk about how on the battlefield in the third movie that Sauron was going to show up.
It was Anatar, which is the representation of Sauron as he is in his true angelic form.
It was the form he took when he managed to fool the elves into actually creating the ring.
So that was the first time I ever heard of this idea. The fact that Sauron could shapeshift, and that if he were to be in a human form, he would be this kind of fair, thin, beautiful elf-like shape. So the opposite of this flaming eyeball and this big scary guy in a costume. And then I got to thinking that Anatar is probably going to be in this show. I mean, they planned 5 seasons, so it might be at the end, but you would think the show is going to end with the rings, right? It's called The Rings of Power. I think they're keeping Sauron under tight wraps here. So he's going to be one of these big reveals. So I thought it'd be fun to try and take a crack at it myself, try to mix some things together and just kind of live in the headspace and create a Lord of the Rings character and try to make Anatar, aka Sexy Sauron. Okay, so here we are in my reference board. This is Pure Ref. If you're unfamiliar, great program for doing reference boards like this. You can see not too crazy. This is the end of my project, so I've definitely built up images over time. I want to drill in really quick, give a shout out to, this is my favorite art of Anatar that I found so far. Took a lot of cues from this, and this is by an artist called Incent on DeviantArt. So yeah, really great work. This was kind of my main key ref, I would say. Some other ones in here that I really liked, some of the things. And here is a paint over we'll get to in a second that I did. So this is kind of my early concept towards the beginning of the project of where I thought I was going to head. Yeah, jumping around, you got some different like heads, things that I like. This is some face reference. I knew I wanted to do this type of pose. I like this lighting as well too. So this became one of the major key refs. And then I like these like faces for various reasons. I like this guy's big nose. And here's some just AI generated stuff of some pretty boys. You know, can never have too many pretty boys in your references, right? And then this is pretty cringe, but I took some references. Just imagine this is a sexy guy. You know what I mean? This is literally me trying to do a sexy face. So, moving over here to the costumes. Oh, the costumes. Speaking of fantasy shows, we're freaking rich these days, dude. We're drowning in them. On House of Dragons, their costumes are amazing. Just to look at it, really. I don't even know. Do I even use this as reference? Who cares? Look at it, though. Wow. Yeah, so I have a actual Sauron armor in here. I thought maybe I could steal some of these shapes. Maybe the acid etching. I don't know. Definitely wanted to go with this crushed velvet and some kind of pattern to give some contrast. You can see here in the original movies, a lot of crushed velvet. Over here, too, on Celebrimbor himself and this, like, ornate collar thing. Really took cues from that. And lastly, the hair. I knew I wanted him to have super flowy, pretty hair. Who's this guy? Jared Leto. Yeah, this guy might be a cult leader. I'm not signing off on this dude, but I mean, his hair though. Pretty. That's some pretty hair. So that's my hair ref. I knew I wanted these like swirls, you know, that I thought would look really great along with the swirls and ornate shapes in his collar. And then here are some examples of what some final compositions could be for my images. So that's it for the reference board. I started this project as I do all projects in ZBrush. Let's jump over there and start making some models now. All right, so over in ZBrush now, I started this project like I do most of my projects that have humans in it. I used my base mesh to get up and running quickly. I removed the legs so I knew I didn't need them. I had a general idea of the composition I was after. So my first big task here is changing this kind of big buff guy shape into a more lean elf-like body. So that's what I'm spending most of my time doing, so I can start to build the costume elements on top of him. So we're leaning him down, making him look a little more sultry, you know? And once I have his body in a better kind of proportion, I start to add the costume elements. Now at this point, I don't really know exactly what they're gonna look like. I know I want some sort of a crown, and then I know I want some kind of simple costume that has some kind of layers with like a high collar. So to help me figure it out, I'm just making meshes quickly. I'm extracting some shapes for the costume, and then I'm just kind of sketching with messy Dynamesh stuff with spheres to like kind of make a clay version of what could be a crown, just so I can get a general idea of the size and shape of things, how it's feeling all in relation to each other, kind of figure out what I need still. I do the same thing with the hair. I'm just blocking it out. I know I'm not going to use this mesh in the end, but it just helps me form a picture of what my final thing is going to be. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to export these meshes and bring it into Maya. That's where I'm going to make my final scene. So in Maya with these temp meshes that are really like muddy and kind of gross, I'm going to do my first setup of the scene. So I'm going to place my lights, figure out what I want my environment to be, the kind of general colors and some materials, and my framing for my camera. I'm going to render this out now, and I have a super quick and dirty version of what my final image could be. Now I'll bring that into Photoshop, and I'm going to start just painting on top of this. 2D design work is just so much quicker than 3D for me. It helps me figure out what I want when I have a really unclear path, because I can try like several different things. So in here, I figure out the different kind of adjustments I want to make, this kind of ornate deal on the collar, the kind of colors, and even his facial expression and head tilt. So now with this quick, dirty image, I have a clear path of where I want to go, and I know what's important in the model and what's not. Back over in ZBrush, going to start applying some of the things I figured out in 2D. One of those major things is the ornate pattern on his clothing around his collar. So I wanted to figure that out. I spent some time creating a custom brush that I could just paint onto the surface to make these like ornate patterns, make it quicker for me to kind of figure out exactly how things are going to flow. And I actually took my cues for the shape from the title announcement video from the show. I liked how it had a little bit of a swoop. It's got kind of a blade edge to it, which I think helps make it look a little bit dangerous, while at the same time being like very flowy and lyrical, like an elven shape. I also added some embroidery type of shapes that look kind of like sunbeams, hopefully, or like kind of flames that are coming out too. So I have a combination of kind of embroidered thread look, and then I had this kind of metal ornate stuff around the collar. The face is something that's pretty much always ongoing and like in flux. So I'm touching it here and there, and I'm always bouncing around. But when I am spending time on the face, for this character, you know, I want him to look thin and obviously smoking hot, and maybe a little bit androgynous, but ultimately I need it to be believable too. And for me, that ends up being like these little subtleties. So I'm kind of searching for the personality in the face as I sculpt, and then later I can lay down more detail. One of the biggest design struggles on this whole thing was the crown, funny enough. Like, it's a simple thing, but initially my original idea was, like in some of these reference images, trying to make a crown that kind of echoed some of the shapes you'd see in Mordor or the tower where the eye would be, and make it feel like something that Sauron would be wearing. I really liked that idea, and I tried to shoehorn it in. You can see I even like wasted some time making some like crown sketches before I figured out what am I doing, you know, with my life. So I ended up going with the shapes that I liked most. I still think it captures a little bit of an essence of something that might be in Mordor, but it's a very simple crown. The only element that I kept and stayed there throughout was this motif of the eye in the center on the forehead. I wanted to keep that imagery of that eye of Sauron there, somewhat subtly, but in the crown. So in the end, it ended up looking a lot more elvish, at least the way I thought of it, rather than evil, which I think is a good thing. I don't want it to be too obvious that he's evil. You know, the idea is that he's in disguise. One of the most important challenges in this whole project was the hair. It's something that I knew I had to get right. If it didn't look convincing, it could ruin the final image. Honestly, I put it off as long as I could. For the hair, I used XGen in Maya, and that is the main reason why I still use Maya for projects like this, is the plugin XGen to make hair. It does such a great job, and along with Arnold Shader, you get really super high quality hair, and this guy was going to have a lot of it. Honestly, it ended up being pretty straightforward in terms of authoring the hair. It took some time. I worked on the hair all by itself over the course of several nights. Really, the key was just staying organized and making the clumps and curls in a way that was believable. I didn't want to get too complicated too quickly, so that I could continue to refine it in an organized way and eventually make these luscious curls. I also used it for the eyebrows. I wanted them boys to be thick, and also for his lashes, which I kept kind of extra long because, you know, because he's pretty. I also recorded the majority of this process in real time for members. So if you're a member, you can check that out. And if you're someone that wants to learn how to make hairstyles like this with XGen and Maya, then you might want to check that out. One of the major kind of edits I did throughout the project was tweaking the color of the hair later on. I thought it would be pure white the whole time, but in my test renders, I could see what was happening was the hair was so bright and white. It was kind of acting like a fill with the light bouncing off of it and illuminating all the face. And I wanted these dramatic shadows. So once I started playing with like making it shades of gray, I thought that the overall image looked a lot better. And I still got that kind of otherworldly quality with having his hair be kind of silver and not a typical natural color. Now with the hair in pretty good shape, it's time to shift our focus to the skin and just moving him along. So we need to start adding more details back over in ZBrush. I'm going to start that with using some of my skin kit textures, loading that up here and starting to spread a bunch of pores everywhere. Keeping the face symmetrical for as long as I can to save time doing things like this. So we're going to be adding little pores and little details like fine wrinkles and stuff. The challenge here when doing the skin detailing is actually because I want him to be pretty and I also want him to be a guy. I can't lean on some of the normal typical things I'd be doing, which is just like, beating up his skin and giving it a bunch of ugly imperfections, which helps to make things look natural. So really walking a fine line here and doing as minimal detailing as possible. So it's actually pretty simple, the overall skin details that I added. I spent the most time making complex things on the lips, which I figured would be somewhat of a focal point, but the skin is like pretty simple, all things considered. I didn't end up doing anything too crazy with the sculpting of the skin details. Like in ZBrush, I didn't use HD geometry or anything like that. I just used typical subdivisions, subdivided it high enough to do these like little tiny pores. And then once I was done with the details, I exported this out as a big displacement map and I finished the look in Maya, mixing it with tiny little noise details in the shader. I mixed two noises actually. One is kind of my cellular pattern and the other one is just kind of a noise. And this brought that high fidelity, sharp look. So mixed with what we sculpted, it seems like it has a ton of details and it breaks up the light and ends up making a somewhat believable skin, I think, and still a smooth complexion, hopefully. After those initial details are put in, then I break the symmetry to get the pose so that the eyes, the neck, just tilting the head. So now we're just completely off the symmetry and any of the detailing or sculpting work I do from now on is just on this particular pose. All right, now it's time to finally lay down some color. We're gonna paint the skin in ZBrush this time. So just using poly paint, I'm just gonna scatter down some different colors with these brushes. Gonna lay down a base color first and then just kind of build variation. That's the name of the game here when you're doing skin colors. This is meant to be subsurface. This is meant to feel organic. So you want a mixture of colors, a little bit of different temperatures. You want big things, little things, hard edges, sharp edges. So it's also like reticulation and freckles and stuff. You can see I also want kind of dark, a little bit darker and redder around the eyelids, which I think helps to look a little bit more natural and also maybe like a little bit evil or creepy or something. And then obviously the lips. Adding some moles too for some naturalism. But again, the challenge here in painting the skin comes down to subtleties. I want him to have this nice elven complexion. I want him to be this pretty kind of perfect looking skin. So how do you do that, without making it look untextured? So normally, especially with dudes, I'm making them ugly because it's easy to do, it's fun to do, and it gives it a lot of details to render. So it took a couple of tries. The first time here, you can see like the skin looks kind of dead and devoid of blood. So I don't want him to look like a vampire. So, it took some iterations and I tweaked the final color and gamma in Maya to like really dial it in so that he finally felt warm-blooded and still retained that kind of perfect elven complexion. I also painted the other kind of utility maps in ZBrush. I did a quick glossiness map and I also created a map that would mask out some of those really tiny noisy details on his lips so the skin can be rough and the lips can be smooth. Once the skin's in good shape, I think he's finally starting to turn into the hottie we all knew he could be. I mean, I put a ring on it, you know what I'm saying? All right, just a few more finishing touches to make this guy done. So I added a little grunge map to the crown just to get little scratches on there so that it catch the light. It's just a little bit more interesting and not so simple. Next thing is this kind of, I don't know if you call it a vest, but this like second layer to his costume, which I just had simple the whole time. I wanted to quickly add some detail without having to go back in ZBrush and sculpt a bunch of stuff. So I checked out the substance source library and I found this awesome looking material that I just really wanted to try out. So I downloaded it, and in Sampler I edited it to just make it all blacked out. Then I applied it back over in Maya, adjusted it to fit my shape. I used it in the displacement map too, so I got all these super crispy details, and I'm really happy how that came out. The last thing I did was I added this little kind of gemstone inside of his ornate collar detail. I wanted to draw attention to that eye motif once again, so I've got it twice on him. I just wanted it to feel like Sauron-ish, and I thought it was a little too subtle and it needed some color down there, so I added this kind of fire orange gemstone here to catch the light. I rendered this out really big for the final one, and I composited everything in Nuke to finish the image. This project took me a little bit more than 40 hours to complete. Show you the concept that I did on that first night, and then we could take a look at the process over time, leading to our final images. Enjoy. And that is how I made Sauron. Thank you very much for watching up to this point. I hope you enjoyed the process. I hope you learned something. That would be cool, and I hope you like the final outcome. A real quick note too about memberships. I'm now migrating all of the exclusive videos I do from Patreon to YouTube. I've got this join button now that you could click if you're interested. And along with this video, there's gonna be like a 6-hour version of all the footage from this project, and a real-time demo that's multiple hours long of making the hair from this project to try to teach people how to do stuff. There's a ton of exclusive videos and tutorials that if you're a super nerd into making 3D art and characters yourself, you might be interested in. So check that out if you're down. I really enjoyed this actually, and diving back into Middle-earth, I would have like the behind the scenes up all the time. I'm watching this show. You know, we're drowning in fantasy shows now, and it's pretty good. I'm trying to just stay positive. I know there's a lot of hate out there for both of these shows, which I kind of think is crazy. I'm not reading too much into it. But for me and with things I'm into, the fact that this stuff is on television right now, you know, on streaming services I already have, and I get to watch it like in 4K at home, is just bananas. So I'm just really trying to let it happen and try to let myself enjoy it. So far, so good. Let me know if you're watching the show and what you think about it. I don't know if you guys are the same kind of nerds as me when it comes to this fantasy stuff, but yeah, really cool to be back in Middle-earth. Can't wait to see Sauron and Anatar and all the other characters that are going to happen on the show. And thank you again for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Peace out. I'm going to read you a quick comment from 2002 on the Tolkien forum that I think sums up the idea of this character real quick. April 7th, 2002. He must have been a sexy beast. I mean, I'm a guy, so obviously I'm not interested. But girls out there, there's a Maya on sale today.